I created this video presentation in order to think more about different depictions of the wizard Merlin throughout the years and how J.K. Rowling's character Dumbledore is one of these depictions, which is important to the Harry Potter phenomenon because it shows how J.K. Rowling was influenced by media and literature that had already been created when she was writing the Harry Potter series, and it highlights the phenomenon of character archetypes. I was intentional about the different characters that I chose to look into and the quotes and descriptions that I am choosing to highlight. When these characters were created and how they are similar and how they influence the creation of the character Dumbledore is another important factor that I looked into because I wanted the outcome to clearly show that many characters, including the character of Dumbledore, have been influenced by previous media, which brings up the discussion of original works and whether or not any story is truly original. First, I want to discuss what the wizard archetype is and what it means. So I took this image from a website and the link is at the bottom. It says that the wizard archetype is one of the wise old man who possesses great knowledge and puts that into use through exploiting a deep understanding of the world, building and making things, mixing up potions, and casting spells. So they're sage, knowledgeable, and sometimes can see the future. So the archetype wizard, where did it come from? Well, all the way back in 1136, Geoffrey of Monmouth created the History of the Kings of Britain. This was the main source credited for the first depiction of the wizard Merlin, which led to the beginning of the wizard archetype. So I'm going to look at some character descriptions and some quotes and just discuss a little bit of the purpose Merlin plays and how he's described. So the History of Kings of Britain Merlin was characterized as a prophet, architect, and advisor. He's a mystic descended from a princess who was also a nun and a demon, so he comes from both good and evil, which helps to give him a greater understanding of the world. He delivers the future of Britain as seen by his guiding spirit, so he tells many, many prophecies in this book, and they're all very, very long. The Merlin in this book is first described as simply a young man, but he grows as the story goes through history. He possesses potent drugs and magic. He remains in the background for most of the narrative and only comes out to serve certain people. And it is said in this book that he helps create Stonehenge, which shows just like the great magical power of this wizard. He is not involved in Arthur's story in this book, which is interesting because every other Merlin is. The quote I chose from this story is by Merlin. He's giving a rally speech where he tries to convince the men to fight bravely. He's telling them that they have to fight because he has seen the future and prophesied that this has to happen. It helps show his kind of straightforward, do what must be done, it's that simple type attitude, and it shows the type of language he uses and what his role in the plot really was. I'm not going to read it all because it's really long, but it basically shows that the character of Merlin in this story is very straightforward. He actually kind of reminds me of a know-it-all. Most of the things he says are said as if they should be obvious, even though half the time he is prophesizing the future and no one knows what he's talking about. So this character adds to the wizard archetype by giving the archetype wizard the characteristics of being very all-knowing, knowledgeable, and steadfast. Moving on to Le Mort d'Arthur, or The Death of Arthur, this story was written by Sir Thomas Malory in the 15th century about King Arthur and his knights. In this story, Merlin is Arthur's mentor. He's important in every aspect of his life, from his conception to his education, his rise to power, and his vision of a kingdom ruled through justice and goodwill. Merlin is central to the lives of all the main characters and shows up whenever he is needed. He is able to see both the past and the future, and he advises and helps out Arthur. He's neither good nor evil in this story. He knows what is to come, and he helps guide Arthur in fulfilling his prophecy. The story is more where the wise old man description comes from in the wizard archetype. You see Merlin have flaws in this character as well, which added to the archetype. The quote I chose for this Merlin, I chose simply because it reminds me of how Dumbledore feels about death, with his quotes, "Do not pity the dead, Harry, pity the living, and above all those who live without love." And his quote, "After all, to the well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure." So the quote from this book is, "O Merlin, here hadst thou been slain for all thy crafts, had I not been. Nay, not so, for I could save myself, and I would, and thou art more near thy death than I am. For thou goest to the deathward, and God be not thy friend. So both characters are very accepting of death, and most of the wizard archetype characters are all very accepting of death. The next showing of the wizard archetype character that I want to look at comes from Tolkien's books The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. So Gandalf is the wizard archetype character of this story. He's first described as an old man with a staff. He had a tall, pointed blue hat, a long gray cloak, a silver scarf over which a white beard hung down below his waist, and immense black boots. So this story is where you see that character description that many people think of as how Merlin looks, with a long white beard and pointy hat and staff or wand. And that adds to the wizard archetype that people often use. Gandalf's characterization is tied to color. He goes from Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White, and when he becomes Gandalf the White, it's kind of a visual representation for his godlike immortality and angelic qualities. He's very much so a savior. This character has a lot more dialogue than the Merlins of the past, and a lot of things he says are similar to things that Dumbledore says. He is also linked to the element of fire, which reminds me of Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix. He guides and persuades people to fight with him against evil. There's a few different quotes that I chose because I wanted to get across how similar these characters are. Gandalf is wise, but from his words you can tell that he has so much knowledge that he sees the world in a different way. And this might make people think he is strange, when in reality his brain is just too big for most. So the first quote shows a philosophy of life and death that is similar to Dumbledore's, and the middle three quotes, they just remind me a lot of Dumbledore's stances on things. For even the very wise cannot see all ends. Like, that just sounds like something that Dumbledore would say as well. And then the last quote is my favorite one. It talks about how Gandalf speaks in riddles, but he's actually just talking to himself because he is the smartest person in the room. It reminds me of Dumbledore's commencement speech at the beginning of Harry Potter, where he randomly says, "Nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak, thank you." No one knows what he's talking about, but he's so smart that they don't question it. So the next book I looked at was The Once and Future King, written by T.H. White in 1958. This book is divided into 4 parts, and the 1963 Disney movie The Sword and the Stone was based on part 1. This was probably the most influential book for J.K. Rowling's characterization of Dumbledore. Many of the qualities seen in Merlin and The Once and Future King are reflected in the character of Dumbledore. It was even stated in a MuggleNet article that The Once and Future King was a major influence for J.K. Rowling. So this book is the adaptation where Merlin moves from just a puppet and advisor to like a very prominent teacher of Arthur. So the first introduction to the character of Merlin is a comic scatterbrained character. He's struggling with a bucket of water and covered with bird droppings. He possesses a wisdom not found anywhere else. He was born at the wrong end of time, so that means he's seen the future and he knows how and when and why King Arthur will die. This is similar to the fact that Dumbledore knows that Harry will one day have to sacrifice himself in order to defeat Voldemort. His physical description in this story is very much similar to the wizard archetype that I've already mentioned. There's a large focus on knowledge and learning new things, which can also be seen in the character of Dumbledore, as he chose to be a professor instead of working for the Ministry of Magic. I think that this character is largely where Dumbledore's teaching style comes from as well, because Merlin gives Arthur some knowledge and tools and then puts him in a sticky situation in this story and stands by as Arthur tries to navigate his way out. This is very similar to Dumbledore with Harry. He gives him the tools and hints at things to come, but then he stands back and lets Harry learn from experience and fight his own battles, saying that that help will always be given at Hogwarts to anyone who asks. So the quote I chose from this character just highlights the importance of knowledge to the wizard archetype. You can have skill, but you are nothing without the knowledge of how to properly use the skill. So the very beginning, he just says, the best thing for being sad is to learn something new. And then the rest of the quote is really awesome as well. Now, finally, I want to move on to Harry Potter, written by J.K. Rowling. Obviously, this is a 7-book series. The description given for Dumbledore in this book is very similar to Gandalf and in The Once and Future King, with the wizard archetype, hat and cloak and wand. His mission is also the same as Merlin's in every story. He strives to teach Harry the same way that Merlin strives to teach Arthur. He is wise, gentle, kind, mysterious in a way, and knowledgeable, caring, and understanding. And then I chose multiple quotes to add in this that are just similar to other quotes. So the first one, this quote is similar to Merlin in Le Morte d'Arthur and Merlin in The Once and Future King, as well as the character of Gandalf, just with his stance on the truth. All of the characters strive to teach someone about life and about right and wrong and what needs to be done. So it matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be, that quote. And then the other quotes are just kind of his like randomness and his like scatterbrainedness that you can see in like The Once and Future King. And then the last 2 quotes are also themes of the wizard archetype. They highlight that they are there to guide people and they gently push the protagonist in certain directions and help them see the truths. So now I want to talk about what all of this means. It is clear that these characters are similar and that they create a wizard archetype, but how does this archetype and others like it affect the way that people write and affect stories as a whole? So first I just want to outline my evidence. So J.K. Rowling first had the idea for Harry Potter in 1990, and the first book was published in 1997. So all of the materials that I mentioned had already been created by then. And looking at the similarities in speech, description of physical appearance, description of magical abilities, and the overall purpose each character plays in their respective plots allows you to really see clear similarities and how each character belonging to the wizard archetype was influenced by the characters written into existence before it. So in terms of critical thinking, I really challenged myself to look at the way each of the characters spoke or were spoken about by picking out quotes and looking at quotes that were similar between the characters, and then looking at the way their physical appearances were or were not described, and looking at the overall role they played in their storylines. The evidence I chose to present to support my ideas were character descriptions found in each story and quotes found in each story, which makes sense because this is the best way to find similarities and differences between multiple characters when comparing them all to each other. This shows how even works of fiction that are renowned for their creativity and originality draw from past materials to create something new. There are many parallels and similarities between the wizards I discussed, and yet they are all still considered original. So now moving on to the big so what. Many people have discussed what it means to create an original work and whether or not anything is truly original. We've discussed this concept in class before as well. My project helps analyze this concept of originality and what it means to be original. So I outlined a character archetype and how you can see similar characteristics and characterizations of a particular type of character in multiple different books. I showed that J.K. Rowling's character, Dumbledore, shares many similarities with other characters that fall into the wizard archetype that I've outlined. So having seen that these characters are all similar and belong to the same character archetype of a wise wizard, does that mean that no character is ever truly original? No, I don't think so. I think it's obvious that these characters are similar and have similar goals and views, but they all belong to different worlds, and each of these characters has unique qualities as well. They have different situations in which they are placed, and they interact with different kinds of people depending on the type of world they live in. I think that just because character archetypes exist doesn't mean that a work can't be original, because there are so many more pieces to the puzzle that make up each story. So my project just adds to this conversation about originality and whether or not any work can be truly original. I think that Harry Potter is original, I think that Dumbledore is original, and I think that all of the works that I've highlighted are original. So I hope that I've given you an interesting look into the making of different characters and character archetypes. I invite you to consider now whether or not you believe that a work can ever truly be original, or that a character can ever truly be original when they are influenced by past characters. Here are some of the sources that I used to find my character descriptions and to find my quotes. And then here are all of the books that I outlined. Thank you for learning with me.